Mac Power Users, episode 669, Drowning Out the Noise with Charlie Chapman. Hello, everyone. This is David Sparks. I am joined, as always, by Stephen Hackett. Hey, Stephen.
Hey, David. How are you?
I'm doing great, Stephen. And we have a guest with us today. Welcome to the show, Charlie Chapman.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Charlie is the developer of Stephen and I's very favorite noise app, Dark Noise, and also just a swell guy. And we wanted to talk to Charlie about how he's using his Mac and what he's up to and development of Dark Noise. We got a lot to cover today, Charlie.
Yeah, I'm very, very excited to be here. This is a podcast I've been listening to for a very long time on a network that I've been listening to for a very long time. So it's kind of, I don't know, like a dream come true kind of situation. So I'm excited to be here.
Well, that's awesome. Well, we are both very eager to talk to you about your app. I know I use it daily, so yep. we have stuff to talk about here. But before so, a little bit of housekeeping. The Mac Power Users annual plans are still on sale. Go to www.giverelay.com. That's 20% off. We only do this once a year. Not much time left. Get in there and get signed up.
Yeah, and today on More Power Users, I want to talk about my two-screen experiment. So listeners may remember that David tried this a while back and then went back to just one display plus an iPad. I'm trying the dual display thing on my Mac for the first time in a long time, so I thought I could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and I think listeners should also remember back when I was using actually 3 displays. I had a big one and 2 on each side, my ears. Stephen mocked me and made fun of me, and it hurt my feelings, frankly. And
did I?
And now he's doing it. One day he just sent me a picture of his extra screen next to his Mac, and I was thinking, shoes on the other foot now, I guess. So I have a lot of questions.
Okay. Yeah, we will get to that in More Power Users today. So, Charlie, we want to talk to you about what you're up to, kind of what you're doing with the app and your podcast. And I want to talk about Sherlocking. But first, I want to get to know you a little bit better, get our listeners to know you a little bit better. I'm sure a lot of people have used something that you have made, but how did you get into this app podcast, like Apple ecosystem space?
Well, you actually are partially to blame for that, surprisingly. So I'm a developer, went to school, got a computer science degree, and living here in Missouri, in the middle of America, the main worlds that exist here as far as jobs go are Java or .NET, which is like the Microsoft stack. And I kind of fell into the Microsoft stack, and that was sort of what I did for a long time. But because of starting with Hello Internet, weirdly, and then falling through Cortex into the Relay sort of world, I got really into the Apple ecosystem and listening to that, even though I was an Android user, weirdly, at the time. But I was a big Mac user. And I just loved that idea. And I got an opportunity to sort of play in that space during the brief Windows Phone era. So I had a job opportunity to build Windows Phone apps. And so I did that for a while. And actually, the first indie app I ever made was a Windows Phone, Windows 8 tablet app for Vimeo, if you ever used Vimeo, for viewing that. And so that was my first taste of that world. But I didn't, there wasn't a whole lot of people there. So it was more or less me sort of getting to make something, develop something, use all the apps that you guys talk about for project management and all that stuff. But it was really just for fun. And that wasn't super long lived. And then I kind of fell back into the normal Microsoft stack web development world. And then at the last company I was at, it was a consulting. I had sort of a weird opportunity to jump onto a iOS team, despite having never downloaded or used Xcode in my life. And so I just jumped on that because I was excited to try it, and I knew I liked building touch, interfaces and stuff. And so as part of that, I was like, I need to learn how to do this. So I'm actually helping my team quickly. And so I was like, I'm going to make some sort of side app. And the side app that I made was ended up being Dark Noise, but it was basically a thing I was doing on the side to try and learn how to build this stuff. And I know we're going to get into that a little bit later, but that was sort of how I fell into the iOS development world. And now I work at a different company now, but I'm doing, iOS development there as like my normal full-time job. And then I have probably too many side projects going as well.
Well, congratulations on surviving Windows Phone. I mean, I pulled up the Wikipedia article.
Is it surviving? I'm not doing it still.
Yeah, well, I mean, I could talk about it forever. So many interesting ideas in those operating systems with the live tiles and Metro and all that stuff. But it's all gone now. All just in the shoe bin of history. But I didn't realize that Dark Noise was kind of your one of your early ways of exploring iOS development. I mean, that's wild to me.
Yeah, I mean, literally, it was, I wrote the like now playing little animation thing where it goes from basically taking Marco's ideas from Overcast and it kind of shrinks down into that small playing window to reveal everything else. I built that like my second month of having wrote Swift in my life. There was a lot of fumbling. There's a lot of code in this app that's embarrassing whenever I get there, and I try to clean it up whenever I do. But it was definitely a learning project whenever it started, for sure.
Yeah, and so often people make the Hello World style learning projects just to get their feet wet, and you actually made a commercially viable app.
Yeah, not necessarily on purpose. I didn't think that would be the case, but turns out a lot of people like using these types of apps.
Well, I want to get into that, but before we do, this is Mac Power Users. Tell us about your gear.
Yeah, so this is where you guys have been a major influence on my life, maybe too. I definitely have a lot of Apple gear now. So I guess we'll start with my main machine. For me personally, is M1 Max MacBook Pro 14-inch, which I was extremely excited whenever they made the 14-inch basically just as powerful, and you could get the M1 Max in there because that is my favorite like laptop style, especially for my personal machine as my side project machine, because I don't get to work at a desk very often with that type of work. I'm usually, I fed the kids breakfast and I'm publishing an episode, or I put them down for naps, especially when my kids were younger, and you have like that sweet hour of quiet, and you'd sit in the living room as quietly as you could, and you'd try and knock some stuff out. And I used to do that on a 13-inch MacBook Pro, and I had a iMac that was my I haven't mentioned this, but I used to do and still do to some degree like motion graphics and video editing and stuff. And so I had an iMac as that machine. But when the 16-inch MacBook Pro that sort of corrected everything, still in the Intel era, when that came out, I switched to that and consolidated both of my machines into one. And I was excited about that, but I learned that 16 inches is really big for something that you're carrying around with you all the time. So I was very happy to go down to the 14-inch. So that's my personal MacBook Pro. And then my work MacBook Pro is actually the 16-inch M1 M1 Max.
Got the pair.
And so yeah, and you guys have talked about this on previous shows, so I won't go too far into it, but I am a very heavy universal control user. And so my desk looks way more power user-y than I probably actually am, because I always have my personal machine on one side, my work one on another side, and then a studio display in the middle. And they're always connected to each other. So there's one keyboard, one mouse, and I switch which machine is connected to that studio display all the time. Like right before we started recording this, I unplugged the Thunderbolt cable and from my work computer and plugged it into my personal computer. And actually, I wouldn't have been able to tell you, but I'm pretty sure that my trackpad is still connected to my work computer right now. But it's controlling my personal computer that's hooked up to my studio display. So it's sort of this bizarre, Apple magic. It feels like a commercial world that I live in sometimes, because copy and paste and all of that stuff works so seamlessly between devices that it almost treats them like they're one machine, even though in reality it's two separate machines. So I absolutely love that.
I mean, I used to do the thing where I had a mouse and keyboard that had multiple Bluetooth radios in it, right? And that way I could conceivably switch my mouse and keyboard between an iPad and a Mac or two Macs on my desk. And universal control just completely eliminates all that friction. You just turn it on and that's it. And people out there who have an extra device sitting around and you'd like some extra screen real estate, I mean, we've said it on the show now enough, but I just can't emphasize how easy it is, and I love it. Like it's just a natural thing for me now to drag my mouse onto my iPad and start doing something on my iPad while I'm sitting there working.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it really exemplifies the sort of Apple like building on top of technology you've already established for a long time, because oh shoot, what is it? It's not universal control, but the thing that allows the handoff like technology stack means that I will frequently take code that I wrote for my side thing that helped me with some problem, and I'm using it as reference for something that I worked on at my regular job, and I can just copy and paste text over there, or I can take an image that I created or a screenshot that I created on one computer and just drag it over across monitors that are technically owned by different computers to another one and just drop it in place. And it all just works. And it's kind of magical. It's also infuriating whenever it does, fail, because it's not perfect. And I do sometimes run into those, but that always shows me just how much I've come to rely on it.
What kind of failures are you getting on it?
So the biggest one was during the Ventura beta. It was really unreliable just for working with universal control at all.
Yeah.
So that was when I realized, like, I really want this to always be working, because I had sort of rearranged my desk to push my computer back farther, so I don't need to reach the keyboard and mouse. It's kind of up. This is my laptop. It's kind of up on a stand.
Yeah.
And it started getting really hard whenever I did want to reference, something over on my personal computer while I was working on my regular one, my work one, because, you have to reach way over to kind of move stuff around. But since the actual public release has come out, I haven't really run into those problems again.
Yeah, I've had historically some problems with the second screen moving, and I know, Stephen, you're doing this now too, where like the screen, because I keep it below and to the right of my main display, so I want to pull the mouse down on the bottom right and have it land on the iPad, and then occasionally the screen would virtually put it on the upper left corner of my monitor. And and then you'd have to go into display, you'd be like, hey, where'd it go, and with the public release of Ventura, that has completely gone away. Whatever bug that was, they've fixed it. So yeah, I've had really consistent support with this thing now. And I guess we've been banging the drum about this enough, but if you got two devices, you can use them. You don't need a special mouse and keyboard or a KVM switch or anything else. Just turn it on and start using it. And you'll be surprised all the use you have for it.
Charlie, I know a lot of our listeners are in a situation like you are, where you have a work computer and a personal computer. And I was wondering how you approach that. I mean, do you try to keep things strictly separate, or are the boundaries a little bit messy at times?
I try to keep everything as separate as I can. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if you guys know anybody who is, but
I used to.
Yeah. Touche.
What is this lawyer thing you're talking about? I've never heard of it.
But like, I'm very paranoid about like, I don't want anything from my work computer touching my regular computer or my personal computer. As far as, I wouldn't want any code that I wrote, on the clock that's owned by my employer to end up in dark noise, for example. Like, that's something I'm really careful about. And so for the most part, I kept boundaries extremely separate. The one thing that I kind of let slip through, maybe I shouldn't be saying this on a public podcast, I don't know, but I am logged into my work computer with my personal iCloud account. And the reason for that is there's a lot of software that makes me way better at my job that I want access to.
Yeah, including universal control that looks at what Apple ID signed in.
Yeah, once you open that box, at least a little bit, I have a bunch of stuff turned off there still, but universal control is now a thing that you have. Universal like clipboard with handoff is a thing, and I use Paste. That's the clipboard manager I use. I don't know if it's something with Paste or handoff, or I don't know if other clipboard managers do this too. But what I found is if I copy something on any of my devices, Paste will pick that up like on my work computer, which is really handy on my with my phone. So on my phone, I can copy text and I'll hear the little sound that Paste makes, which I leave on and would probably drive other people crazy. But it's because it doesn't work 1,000% of the time, And then I get sort of clipboard management and some history on my iPhone through Paste on my Mac, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, I remember when we did our clipboard manager roundup a while back. That was a use case that came up. Bringing things across machines, not just clipboard management in terms of history, like on one computer, but hey, what if I have this here and I want it over there? Paste is a pretty great way of doing that.
Yeah, it's surprisingly useful, especially as an iOS developer, because sitting in front of me too, and you can tell I talk too much because we're still in the Mac section. But the iPhone I have is an iPhone 14 Pro. But I also have just a little pile of test devices. And unless I'm doing some beta stuff that I'm a little scared of, I tend to leave those logged into my personal iCloud account too. And the reason is the same. It's so quick to like share screenshots and text and password sharing for logging into things and whatever between all of those devices. And it kind of makes my like Apple ecosystem this holistic, network glue thing between this constantly revolving series of actual devices that I have on my desk.
So what other devices are on your desk? What do you use in terms of iPad and iPhone?
So my iPad, this will probably come as a shock, but it is a 2018 iPad Pro, 11-inch. Like many people, it has served me extremely reliably for a long time, and I haven't needed more. Every time a new iPad comes out, I get excited and hope that they're going to at least give it mini LED or something. And every year that they don't, I'm like, all right, I'll just wait another year, I guess, because it still works. And that device is A, for testing, and B, the biggest thing I use it for is the podcast I do has custom artwork for every episode, and it's in kind of a sketch style. And so I use Photoshop on the iPad. I've used lots of other apps, and I always end up falling back to Photoshop. I know I'm weird, I guess, in that regard, but that I use constantly all the time to make all these icons. And so with the Apple Pencil, and that has been extremely useful, like way easier than my old Wacom setup, especially portably, because I'm often, like I said, doing this at the kitchen table or, while the kids are having their screen time or something. I'm just knocking out these icons really quick. And so that's been really handy. And then let's see what else is on my desk. I use HomePod minis as my, I have 2 HomePod minis in like a stereo pair. That's sort of for playing music and stuff, which is nice because you can AirPlay to it, and it's a separate audio from the rest of your device. Mm-hmm. So I like having those kind of, it can be fiddly in some ways, but most of the time it's actually really handy. And then I have like an audio interface here for my microphone is connected to that. And I guess I have a microphone stand that's usually pushed out of the way over here. And I need to get a new one that's longer, but it's served me well for a very long time. So I don't even know what brand. It's some, random Amazon brand probably, but I've had it for a very long time. But that's pretty much my desk.
Charlie, with respect to the HomePod minis, so now are you driving music and audio to that from your Mac, or who's sending the music to that?
So usually, not right now, currently in December of 2022, it's usually being driven off of my Mac using the SAD Apple Music app for Mac.
Yeah.
What is often the case. I have a picture in the show notes that I added. I think you can probably add it to the show notes for the episode if you want to. But you can see in the background there's a computer monitor kind of sitting on a little stand back behind my desk. A lot of times I'll have an Apple TV connected to that because I've done some Apple TV development. And what I had found was I actually really liked using that to drive my music. For a similar reason, as I said earlier, I like having it separate from all my other music or all my other sound coming from my Mac. And so I could have my Apple TV remote just sitting, right under my monitor. And right before a call, I could just reach up and hit pause and the music would stop. And then I could join the Zoom call. And there was no, fiddling around with, oh no, my audio source is set to my speakers and I need it to be my AirPods or whatever. And then when the meeting's over, I just reach up and hit play and it starts back up again.
Okay, so you're using then the HomePod. I'm confused. Are you using the HomePods for the rest of the audio from your Mac as well, or just music?
Just music.
Okay.
Yeah. So in Apple Music, you can use AirPlay too.
Yeah. Yeah, I do
select
the same
those
thing.
as a separate source. Yeah.
But I got the impression you're using it for audio too, and that's always I found kind of troublesome.
Especially if you're jumping on Zoom calls often, as I am, and you want to switch it back to your AirPods or whatever.
What about the Apple Watch?
So I actually just upgraded to the Series 8. That's the one that just came out. I'll be honest, it's like I had the Series 5, I think, before that. And the main upgrade was, my battery life being back up so I could use the always on screen again. I wouldn't say I'm a power user on the Apple Watch at all. To me, it's a nice watch that collects all the data that I like it to collect, health and fitness stuff. And then gives me notifications. I do like that. But for the most part, I've never really found ways to integrate it into my life in ways that help me out that much, if that makes sense. And I would be remiss if I didn't come onto a popular podcast and scream to the rooftops that I wish it had third-party watch faces, because that's the biggest thing I miss from my old Android Wear watch that I had a long time ago. But that's what I'm rocking for the watch.
Do you guys think Apple's just given up on third-party faces? Like they've just made a decision they're never going to do it? I mean, at some point you have to wonder, right? Because they certainly have had the time to make them by now.
Yeah, I mean, we're a long way into the Watch OS life cycle now, but then I think about how long it took for them to add widgets to iOS and some other things that are very common on other platforms. So I still hold a sliver of hope, I think.
I think Apple isn't a single entity. And so it constantly changes who has more influence in the company. So even if it was a decision that somebody actively chooses, the fact that so many people want it, and it would sell watches means I think on an infinite timescale we'll get there. But I also think if there was some, actual philosophical reason why they didn't want it, that would have been like sort of messaged out through leaks or just people talking by now. Like it's been so long and people have been asking for it for so long. It would surprise me if there was some explicit philosophical reason they didn't want it, other than we're not ready yet for battery or whatever. It would surprise me if we hadn't heard what that is by now,
Well, I think we kind of have heard. I think they don't want their beautiful watch to be saddled with ugly faces. I feel like that certainly was the impression I got at the beginning. But who knows? I mean, there's a lot of ways to get around that too. You could have an approval process. You could have a store. You could, it does make me sad. I mean, I've kind of got over it at this point, and I'm okay with the faces I'm using. But boy, I wish there were more.
I mostly notice it when I get a new watch or when the new Watch OS comes out every year, and I look at the watch faces again. I'm like, oh, I should probably switch things up, and then I get sad. But yeah, once I get back in, once I stop thinking about it, it's like, all right, this is my watch face, and that's just how it is.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by 1Password. Go to onepassword.com/MPU in all caps and get 20% off your sign-up. For years, 1Password has been the password solution that Stephen and I use to protect ourselves on the internet. And one of the things I love about 1Password is the way the company continues to evolve. Signing in on the internet has become more difficult than ever. As you sign into websites and services, they all have different ways they want you to use their service. Some are using modern techniques, some are using old ones, other ones want to email you something or send you a text message, and it's difficult to keep all of those methods down. Well, not if you're using 1Password. With 1Password, they're developing universal sign-on, so it'll remember how you sign on to each account so you don't have to. If you use a password, a passkey, or a social login, whatever it is for that site, 1Password will use the appropriate method. And of course, because it's 1Password, it's simple, secure, and seamless. It syncs securely to all your devices. You don't have to worry about losing passwords. Everything is covered for you. 1Password already protects your credentials, documents, and private notes with their online systems. But with 1Password, you can also share that with your company or your family. So no matter where you go, 1Password keeps your data secure and your workflow simple. I use 1Password every day, so does my wife and kids. That is the place that we protect ourselves on the internet. You should have a place like that too. Go check out 1Password. You can get 20% off if you go to onepassword.com/MPU. Once again, that's onepassword.com/MPU to get that 20% off. Let them know you heard about it here. Thanks again to 1Password for all of your support of the Mac Power users.
So, Charlie, you are the developer behind the excellent Dark Noise app, which is just a fantastic noise generation app for the iPhone, iPad, Mac. Is it on the Apple TV?
No, not currently.
And I first came across this app probably several years ago, and I followed it. And like David, I use it all the time. You mentioned earlier that it was kind of your starting point in terms of iOS development for yourself, but why this category of app? Why did you decide, this is the direction you wanted to go?
So, why this one in the first place is, having listened to a lot of apps that you all do, I've always had lots of notes of like ideas of projects I'd like to work on or things I'd like to do or whatever. And so, like I said, whenever I got into iOS development, I was looking for something to help me learn this faster. And so I just went to this list of things that I already had, these ideas. And what I was really looking for was what's something that will focus mostly on iOS development itself. So it didn't need a server, it didn't need a lot of database work, because what I was really trying to focus on was like UI kit at the time and what the like platform rules are and how to design something good. And so a white noise app was already on my list, and that kind of fit the bill of something that was really just focused on the platform. The reason it was on my list goes back a little bit farther. Whenever I switched from Android to iOS, we switched because we had kids, and at the time we wanted the best camera we could get, and that was pretty much the main reason for switching. But I had listened to lots of your podcasts before. I knew there was lots of great indie apps, and so I was excited to kind of dive into the App Store and find good apps. And one of the first apps we looked for was something that my wife uses every single night, which is a way to play white noise or like rain noise. That was, as soon as you get a new phone, the first time you go to sleep, you're like, all right, how do I make it do this thing that we've been doing for forever?
Mm-hmm.
And what I found there was there was a lot of them, and it was really difficult to find one that just did the thing I wanted. I feel like it's a category that is huge and grew really fast when the App Store first came out. And the ones that were big, at the time at least, they were pretty much they looked like they came from the original iOS era. Like they all kind of had iOS 7 redesign slapped on, but they had that feel of just older apps.
Or you could call it a wasteland of garbage apps. I mean, honestly, it was terrible. I mean, I feel like the original generation of these things were like Windows mobile apps that had been, somehow squeezed onto the iPhone. They were just. You are much more generous than I am, Charlie. I mean, but that's the brilliance of this, is that you picked a category that was just ripe for a good app, where there wasn't one.
And specifically, like in that sort of indie darling space, if that makes sense. I won't pretend that that's where I'm at right now, but that was sort of as I got into building it, that was sort of what I realized was there isn't a, Carrot Weather or Overcast or one of these apps that everybody's kind of like this one, or one of these couple are kind of the ones that like the indie people really like and use and showcase what the platform can be capable of, kind of things. And so that was really what I targeted, because there's huge players in the space too. There's Calm and Headspace that are big, lots of money, and they have John Hamm reading you Twinkle Twinkle Little Stars or something like that, right? Obviously, that wasn't something I was going to be able to do, but it felt like there was a spot, underneath that, that was maybe less of like a whole experience and more of this is a utility that takes advantage of the platform, is a really good platform citizen, and is extremely efficient. That was the other thing, because a lot of these apps, as they grow, they become more about these complicated soundscapes and meditations and things like that, which is not an area I'm an expert in. And if I want to expand into those areas, I'm going to need help and know people that do it. But what I used it for was, we're going to bed and I want to make the thing make the sound as fast as I can and then go away. I don't want to look at it ever again. And the same goes for work. Like, as I started realizing that people use this for work, and then I started doing the same when I was forced to work at home on my own. I just want coffee shop sounds in the background, and I don't want it to feel like this experience that I'm spending a bunch of time in. My goal is to make the thing and then get back to what I'm actually trying to focus on, which is not the sound. The sound, by definition, is a background sound. It feels like the app should sort of honor that wish in a weird way.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, the noise application I used before Dark Noise, like, it very much wanted you to be in the UI, and it had tons of things in there, and you could add things and change all your settings. And Dark Noise has evolved and has added a lot of features over the years. But I do find it curious, like with your app and with Overcast in particular, both of these apps I use all the time. They look really nice. They're great to use, but I don't actually interact with them all that much, right? Like, I go in and I hit my favorite sound, and then I lock my phone, and you spend all this time in this UI design in the app that most people only see a little bit of the time. And that's so different from other types of app development.
Yeah, any any audio apps, I guess, probably fit that bill. Maybe Apple Music could use some of this thinking too. But yeah, that's why when you open the app, the very first thing you see is a big play button. My original designs, it was a huge play button. I toned that down a little bit, but high contrast, white circle play button in the middle for, by default, it's just white noise, because that's probably what most people are here for. And you could download the app, open it, and hit that button and close it and never look at anything else. And I hope it can still give you exactly what you want. And that was kind of the genesis of the name Dark Noise. Was, you're probably using this in the dark. I wear glasses, and a lot of times if I forget to start it, I don't have my glasses on. And so I wanted it to be this dark interface that's not bright and in your face, because you might be half asleep. But then a high contrast play button that you can at least, jam your finger on to make it start playing the sound, and then it goes away. It's out of your face.
One of the features I absolutely love in Dark Noise is the ability to blend different noises. So I just opened it on here on my Mac Studio, and I have two favorites: brown noise plus rain and brown noise plus campfire. And I remember talking to you probably years ago now when you were adding this mix feature where you could go in and kind of build your own sounds. And I was wondering either about that feature in particular or features more generally. How do you think about and choose what features to put into this app? Do you listen to feedback? Is it more kind of where it started as something that you want for your use? How does that work?
So I'm not really a professional user of my app. Like, a lot of people, when they build apps, they're building it for themselves. I'm doing air quotes for some reason. You can't see that. But like with Dark Noise, I've grown to use it more in reality, not just for testing. But originally, it was more or less for my wife. And then I started a test flight, and it got quite a few users on it, and I got lots of feedback from them. And that's really how a lot of ideas came to be. And so there's a lot of other apps that have mixing sounds as a feature. In fact, a lot of them, the way they work is you open the app and it's just like a bunch of sounds you can pick from, and you can basically turn them on and set volumes for them all. But with this, kind of going back to my original idea of like, I want it to be something that you get in and get out as fast as you can. I sort of built the mix feature to be focused on that. So most of the time, people probably don't, like, you probably don't spend very much time in the mix interface.
I made them and favorited them and then moved on.
Exactly. And so I kind of optimized it for that. So you could imagine an app that's a little bit easier for doing mixing by having them all in front of you, and you can set the different volumes at the beginning. But I figured most people, they're going to set one up and then they're never going to touch it again. And so that's kind of how it works is you can create a mix, save it, and then it just shows up in your list just like anything else. And yeah, you can add it to your favorites. And so it's at the top. And if it's the last one you played, when you open the app for the first time, that's the only thing you'll see. And for most people, I think that's what it is. I think most people use the exact same sound almost always, but it's tailored to them. And that's really all that they want. And so, like other things, like I was talking about earlier, mixes was almost designed for you to use it as little as possible, sort of explicitly. That was kind of the idea going into it.
I mean, I use your app almost entirely via shortcuts automation. I don't open the app, I just have it trigger when I go into different work modes. And like I was just looking at the app. There's sounds in here I didn't know you had added because I hadn't looked in the sound list recently. So it's just that's the thing I love about your app is it can be invisible for the user if you want it to be, and your shortcut support is really good. For what you're doing. You can do the mixes, you can set a specific sound, everything you need to do via shortcut you can do. And I don't know how many of your users write you about that, but I'm definitely a fan of the shortcut support.
Yeah, shortcuts is definitely an area that I think, especially early on, I haven't surveyed the landscape, so maybe there's a lot of other apps doing that now, but I think in the white noise space, I think I was one of the early adopters for that and try to push on that as hard as I can. And again, it comes to that same thing of like, I'm looking at this more like a utility or a productivity app than an experience. And so deep, system integration is a big part of that. Like if you never have to open the app because you can do everything through the system, that to me is like, that's a benefit. That's one of the differentiators. Whenever I first was working on it, it was before shortcuts came out, and I had like, are they called quick actions, where you could like long press on an app icon? I don't know that anybody ever really used those, but that was a part of my thinking was I need all these types of features, like quick ways to make a sound start, and then you leave the app and never think about it again. And so when shortcuts came out, it was like, yes, this is a no-brainer. Like this fits exactly with the ethos of kind of how I'm building this.
And same thing with the widget support. I think that's kind of on the same idea. Like I've got a focus mode for reading on my iPhone home screen. The rainstorm icon for Dark Knight shows up on my home screen. I just push it to start it and stop it. And I feel like you've done a really good job with the app. Has got a built-in kind of simplicity to it, but in terms of the under the hood stuff that allows us as users to quickly use the app and get it out of the way, I think you've done a really great job with that.
Yeah, and I've really tried to spend a lot of time, and my wife has made sure I've spent a lot of time making it solid. And it sounds weird to say solid, like how complicated could it be? But anybody who's used iOS knows that like audio can be finicky, right? In terms of when does it show up in the lock screen, and if you hit play from this widget, does it properly play and take over audio? And I've tried to like really understand and follow through on all of the integrations for if you unplug headphones, like physical headphones, it'll automatically pause or unpause whenever you plug them back in, and try and be smart about how all of that works. And even like the dynamic island live activity stuff that just came out. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to do much there because there's already a Now Playing widget. Like I got all that for free. But something that's been a feature since the original launch, because somebody requested it, is there's a setting where you can have it mix with other apps. So if you're playing Spotify, you could have rain going in the background or something like that, which is just a setting with how you set up how the audio plays when you tell iOS that you're playing audio. But the problem is if you have that turned on, it doesn't show in the Now Playing widget because that goes to the primary app like Spotify or Apple Music or whatever. And it's always been like a source of confusion for people because they'll turn that on and not remember they turned it on. And then they lost their play pause, button on their screen, or they don't know how to stop it from playing because kind of like an errant tab in a browser. It's like, where is this at? And they have to go find the app or something like that. And so with live activities, I was actually able to basically rebuild the Now Playing widget only if you're using that mix feature. And so you can actually have, you're now playing, showing Spotify or Apple Music or whatever. And then underneath that, you'll have dark noise with a play, pause, skip, next, all those different buttons. And it's actually been surprisingly useful, even for me, somebody who didn't really use that very often. Because like with CarPlay, I don't know if you've ever had this issue before where sometimes podcasts or audiobooks will, like, if there's too much silence in between words, it'll like cut off the beginning of the next word that comes in. And what I found is if I just play a very, very, very low volume, like spaceship noise or airplane noise or something in dark noise, it stops there from ever being silence and it gets rid of that problem entirely. And so I use that all the time, every time that I'm driving now. And now I have, an extra Now Playing widget kind of sitting there and I can quickly pause it or play it from there. And so all those system integrations are kind of, I feel like, a differentiator for the app.
Yeah, well, that's what makes all us nerds love you, Charlie, in your app because you are like going that extra mile. And I was just telling my kids recently, if you just care about what you do, you are ahead of like 90% of everybody else in the world. So find something you can care about, and it's just like you can tell that with this app. And I really appreciate that. But you brought it over to the Mac too. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So my original 4-year plan or whatever you want to call it when I released the app was app comes out and then I knew I wanted mix audio. And then the next thing I wanted was the ability to like import your own sounds. And I spent a very long time. I still haven't released that because it's been just a big, gnarly mess that I haven't been able to fully unwind. But while I was working on that, I don't know if you heard, but in 2020, there was a global pandemic, and a lot of people all of a sudden were working at home with nobody around them, and a significant amount of those people were working on Macs. Apple knows this because they made a lot of money on Macs during that time, and I very quickly started getting just enormous amounts of support requests, or not support requests, but requests for a Mac app version of the app. And that was, to me, like way down the line. And so pretty quickly I pivoted and I was like, all right, this is going to be fun for me anyway. And so I used Catalyst because I wanted to get it out and I was afraid of supporting learning AppKit from scratch and also supporting 2 different apps and everything. And so I was like, I'm going to see if I can make this work with Catalyst. And it turns out it's actually really good. There's obviously issues with it, as we all know. But if you're trying to make, a utility, it doesn't. I'm not trying to make something that is you're typing in or you're using like a text editor or something like that. I was trying to take the same mentality of this is a utility and bring it here. Catalyst was actually really great for that. So most of the app is the iOS version. But the thing that I spent almost all of my time on really trying to nail is the toolbar itself. So I just built a custom toolbar that feels similar to Apple Music and the podcast app, although hopefully a little more reliable than those apps. And I just really wanted that to be Mac feeling, if that makes sense.
I mean, it really is a good job. And I think this is the perfect example of an app for Catalyst. Now, for listeners who aren't, up on all this stuff, Catalyst is the protocol, I guess you'd call it, that Apple came up with to take an iPad app and move it over to the Mac. Particularly with the Apple Silicon transition. But I believe they actually started it even before that. But either way, it doesn't give you the power of something like Swift UI, but it does give you a very easy on ramp with your iPad app onto a Mac. And like an app of this scope, I think is a perfect candidate for something like that. I think didn't Apple do that with their Stocks app? And
Right.
so I think I forget, there was a couple apps that Apple did with this, and they've. I think you picked the right horse for this.
Yeah, exactly. It's a simpler app. The actual experience of it isn't super complicated, and so yeah, like my big focus there was keeping it simple. And unlike, like, for some reason the Apple Music app is really strict about like window size. Like if you want a mini player, you have to, go to window and set it to a mini player. And I thought maybe with Dark Noise, I could take, and maybe this is not Mac-like and people don't like this, but I've gotten positive feedback from it. But I've kind of taken the web approach of making the UI reactive in terms of window size. And so you can shrink the app all the way down to just the toolbar being visible, literally just by dragging the window to be super tiny. And when you bring it to its smallest size, it looks very similar to the QuickTime window when you're playing audio, which is kind of my thinking there, because I like how you can have Mac apps that are just super tiny and these little tiny things that you can just put wherever you want on your screen and they don't take up much real estate. And so that was sort of my thinking there.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a widget when you shrink it down.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but it's a widget you can leave on your screen. You don't have to swipe in for. And
exactly.
The one touch I definitely want to point out for listeners is you've got two ways of doing this. If you make it long, it's like one row, and if you make it shorter, it compresses to two rows. And the first time I realized that, I'm like, Charlie, I like this. It's like the way the window resizes. It's like, I mean, this is the nerd part of me that says, oh, I bet that was a lot of work to figure out when to make that transition and how to draw it. But so whether you're someone who really wants to make it like a little narrow widget up in the corner, or if you want to make it long and stick it below, your Word document or whatever, he's accommodated both of those functions. I love that.
Yeah, that was one that I was afraid might get me rejected. Also, people might not like, because again, I don't know if that's really quote unquote Mac-like, but it felt in the spirit of the Mac, it's doing what the user is trying to make it do. That was kind of my driving force behind that thinking, is like, yeah, do you want it to be as short as possible, or do you want the height to be as short as possible, or do you want the width to be as short as possible? And I can make both happen. It's software. And so that's what I was trying to do there.
This episode of MPU is brought to you by Squarespace. We're towards the end of the year now, and maybe you're thinking about projects for next year. Chances are that project is going to need a website, and you should start, my friend, with Squarespace. They're the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. You can stand out with a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything: products, services, content. Squarespace has you covered for all of it. Squarespace has powerful blogging tools to share stories, photos, videos, and updates. You can categorize, share, and schedule your post to make your content work for you. You can also host a podcast on Squarespace, and it's super easy. You upload your audio, set up your post, and you're out the door for people to listen across a bunch of different podcast apps. And of course, all of this is powered by Squarespace's amazing website engine. And this means that you can customize your website easily with your logo, your colors, typefaces, whatever you want, and put your content right where you want it to be. It's really easy to build a great looking site with Squarespace. Just recently, I overhauled the GiveRelay.com website they're using for our membership sale this month. And it's in Squarespace, really easy to build, nice looking galleries, have links go where I want to go, use the colors I want. Really simple, really straightforward. And honestly, I think it looks really good. So head on over to squarespace.com/MPU for a free trial with no credit card required. It's a great way to get that new project started. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code MPU to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain name. That's squarespace.com/MPU. And when you decide to sign up, use the offer code MPU to get 10% off your first purchase and to show your support for the show. Our thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring Mac Power Users and supporting Relay FM.
All right, so Charlie, you've accidentally made a hit. And, we love Dark Noise. I know a lot of our listeners do too. Hopefully we're inspiring a few people to download it and check it out. So where does it stand currently? Where are you going with it?
Yeah, so like I've said, this is a side project. And so one of the frustrating things with a side project is I guess with a main project too, is you just never have enough time. And so I have these bigger plans for things that I'd really like to do. In particular, getting more variety of sounds in there. Every year, Apple comes out with new features, and I always integrate those features as fast as I can. And that has been easy to keep up with. But these sort of bigger swings of allowing you to have way more sounds has been something I'm hung up on, because currently all of the sounds are baked into the app. There's no online component at all. And so long term, what I really want to do is build out a bigger online component to it so you can download a larger variety of sounds, and I can kind of keep this catalog updating. But time has always been the thing that's hung me up on that. And so I've started making a couple moves to free up more of my time. Like I have a podcast we might talk about later, but I was spending a lot of time editing that, and I've recently gotten an editor for that, and that's freed up a whole bunch of my time. And I'm also trying to sort of pivot more of my focus to this as the only real major side project that I have going. But another piece to that is potentially making it a viable career on its own. I don't know
Sure.
that I'll necessarily be able to do that, but that is one of my long-term dream goals. I don't know. I don't want to commit to it, I guess is what I'm dancing around here. But part of that is making it a more viable business. And so one of the things that I've really been exploring recently is a switch to the business model, which is scary because right now it's a paid upfront app, which I know makes a lot of people very happy. But that has the obvious issue of, it doesn't, you don't keep making more money as people keep using it over a long period of time. And the app's been out for 3 years now. And so one of the things I'm really exploring is potentially adding a subscription option and making this into a more of a sustainable business that I can pour a lot more time and money into in terms of like servers and stuff like that. So that's where a lot of my focus is right now, in terms of trying to figure that out.
When you think about that, or when you talk about it, I mean, what are some cons that you think come up with that? I mean, we've seen some apps go through this process and get some pretty negative feedback. Does that scare you off of it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I get regular reviews and emails of people that are like, thank you for not being a horrible monster who uses subscriptions. And I'm always like, oh no, like you're scaring me. It is a very divisive issue. And I've watched and talked to a lot of people who've gone through these transitions before. And so I'm trying to avoid a lot of those pitfalls. One of them is trying to talk about it a lot up front. I think it being a big surprise is sometimes at least extra cause for frustration for people.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing, which a lot of people, I think more people have learned, is bringing people along and taking care of your existing customers. And that's something I'm very focused on. I don't want to definitely don't want to take anything away from anybody, but I also don't want to make the app frustrating for people who are already customers who really like the app. And so that's a big focus as well. But yeah, I'm definitely scared. I'm scared both of the immediate reaction and people being upset, but I'm also just scared because I like people to like me. And it does feel good to have, it feels good for this to be a side project that you don't have to make a business that supports your family on its own. And so you can make decisions in that regard that other people who are making it their full-time business, they can't necessarily do. I can afford to not have it make as much money because it's a side thing right now. And so I like being, getting all the praise and accolades from people for that, but I don't know that that's necessarily fair or warranted either. So I don't know. I'm dumping a lot of feelings on you right now, but I'm at the beginning stages of this, so it's mostly lots of feelings swirling around.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a complicated thing, right? And I do think the out of the blue, you just open the app one day and it has a new panel and it says, "Hey, I'm a subscription app now." That does feel like
Yeah.
the wrong way to go. And I think you've done a really good job at over the years of Dark Noise communicating with your customers what's coming. And I remember like you do for Dark Noise 2, you did this like trailer video and a bunch of fun stuff. And so I think that's the right approach. And it does make me wonder though, like, do you want to get this to a point where you can be, Charlie, the indie iOS developer?
I mean, that's definitely the dream, right? I think there's an element to of, as we're recording this right now, my field is in a little bit of turmoil.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say it's, this horrible hellscape type situation, at least currently, but there's those elements of like, are things going to be less stable going forward? And the idea of having, another sort of safety net over here with Dark Noise, if something were to happen with my normal job, that's definitely, an element as well. But I'd be lying if I said that my main thinking wasn't, man, wouldn't it be awesome if I could make this work? If I could put the time into it, that some of these apps that I adore and look up to, that they're able to put lots of time into it. And maybe I have too big of a head and think that I could get somewhere closer to their level if I could put more time into it. That's sort of the dream, I guess.
But I think you're on to something, Charlie, honestly, when you say that, keep the features there. The biggest mistake I think people make is when they go to subscription model and now users are expected to pay a monthly fee for the same thing they had already had, and if you look at some of the more successful transitions to subscription model, all of them started saying, hey, everything you've got, you still got, you don't have to pay a subscription for that. But, now if I have this income, I can spend way more time on it and I'm going to add a plus set of features and that's what you'd pay for. But if you're happy with what you've got, nothing's changing. And I think that will quell a lot of that. I think that's the biggest mistake people make is when they, suddenly want you to pay for a set of features you already paid for,
Yeah, for sure. I also think too, there's a sort of, this is a strong word for it, but I think it accurately portrays it. There's a little bit of grief when there's an app that you've been using for a very long time and you've bought multiple, version upgrades for $5 or whatever. And when they switch to subscription, that often means they're investing more in it. They're starting to focus on features for more power users or businesses or enterprise users or something like that. And they're adding a lot more value to it, but they're no longer targeting the app towards you, the like prosumer, like regular, like consumer version of the customer. They're sort of targeting a new group. And I think there's a little bit of sadness that people genuinely feel when that happens, because it sort of feels like you're getting left behind. And I don't know how you avoid that, but I don't know. I think developers can often get very defensive and upset because they're getting a lot of hate thrown their way, and that's an understandable feeling. But I think it's important to understand that there's legitimacy behind the feeling of people being upset too. It's not just, greedy users don't want to pay anything.
Well, in addition to sorting that out, there's a fruit company that's also starting to make sounds. How are you dealing with that? So Apple, for folks out there, I'm being too clever. Apple now has added ambient sound noises to iOS.
Yeah, so it was a weird mix of feelings when they announced this. So I don't believe that was at WWDC. I think that was in one of their press releases they do before WWDC to like clear the decks. And they announced, they're going to have background noises built into iOS. I think it was 15 when that happened. And the first feeling, honestly, was I was excited. It made me feel like a real developer because it's like, oh, am I getting Sherlocked? Like, I don't know. This is a thing I've been hearing people talk about for so long. More than existential fear. Because, I don't have a company now and I don't have employees. So I don't have that same fear that a lot of people necessarily have. And then the next feeling was genuine fear because when I looked at the list of sounds, there's only like 5, but one of them is called dark noise, which I've listened to Marco Arment enough that I'd spent a lot of time finding a name that hadn't been used anywhere. But I hadn't listened to Marco enough to trademark that name. And so I was genuinely scared, like, am I in trouble? Are they going to like shut me down or make me change my name or what's going on with that? That has proven to not really be an issue, other than the fact that my Google alerts are shot because it used to be any Google alert I got was genuinely for my app. And now most of the time it's somebody writing about, Apple accessibility features. But in terms of the actual, what you're actually going for this question, like what many people say with getting Sherlocked, it's not like they really came after me. Like we've talked about, there are 1,000 apps out there for playing ambient sounds. In fact, Apple was already in this game because Apple Music has rain sounds and white noise sounds in Apple Music. What I was bringing to the table was, like we've talked about already, like a streamlined utility with all the system hooks. And at least with this version of Apple's background sounds, it's definitely not that. It's very much an accessibility feature it's pretty buried into settings. And so that definitely doesn't worry me at all. If they were to come out with a dedicated, noise app, I think I might have to look at the world and think, okay, what do I need to do to differentiate from this? Because there's definitely an element of dark noise that is a dark noise app, the way Apple would make it, right? Which I know lots of indie developers use as their pitch, but it really is like I try to hook into everything and I try to make it feel really native. But if Apple makes one, it's going to hook into most system features and it's going to feel really native, and they'll be able to hook into more features than even I would be able to, right? And so I might have to look at the world and shift things, but I think I've already found that the white space ecosystem, I don't know what you want to call that, market, is so big that I can find a niche of people that aren't satisfied with whatever they would offer theoretically in the future, and I could fulfill that.
And just because Apple can, make it into the system better doesn't mean they will. And this initial install, in my opinion, is pretty obscure. I don't think you have a lot to worry about.
Yeah, that's kind of my thinking too. It's not like I've had on my podcast like Matt Rongi, who works at Astropad or runs Astropad, and like when Sidecar came out for the iPad and was like legitimately like a direct attack on Luna Display, one of their apps / hardware devices. That was a much more existential, kind of situation. He's got a company with employees, and it was way more a direct hit and had those system integrations that they literally don't have access to. And they had to do a lot of work and soul searching to deal with that. But I don't think I'm in that situation, nor do I see that really coming anytime soon.
If anything, it may turn people onto your app when you think about it. If they discover, oh, I kind of like rain sounds. Now, if I could only, fire it off with a shortcut and make it play with my music or, all the stuff that you do that they don't.
I'm also curious if the name dark noise helps me somehow. Like, I don't have any metrics to back this up, but it does make me wonder if, like, you see dark noise in this list or see it on 9 to 5 article or something like that, and you just go to the App Store and search for it because that's how lots of people look for things. I wonder if that actually helps my, ASO or SEO or anything like that. But I doubt it's very much. Like you said, I think it's a pretty obscure feature at this point.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Electric. Unbury yourself from IT tasks and get a free pair of Beats Solo 3 wireless headphones when you schedule a qualified meeting. Just go to electric.ai/MPU. Turning a small business into an empire takes work, and you have to keep your ear to the ground for things that will help you take it to the next level. But this can be hard when your attention is pulled in different directions because that's the reality of being a boss. And the problem is that you are listening to the Mac Power Users. You're not only a boss, you're also an IT maverick. You could figure out a lot of the computer stuff you need at your work, but that's not your job. The team over at Electric knows small businesses, maybe like yours, face these challenges. And that's why they've solved the problem for you by operating as your IT department. Instead of spending your time sorting through unused application licenses or setting up employee laptops, why don't you let somebody else do that for you so you can build your empire? And with Electric acting as your IT department, you can get back to what you're good at. Plus, you get a really cool IT platform to see and manage everything. The problem, gang, is what I call nerd kryptonite. We're just good enough at this stuff that we want to do it all ourselves. That becomes our kryptonite. It's the thing that brings us down. Sometimes we have to let go. We have to delegate and let somebody else handle that stuff for us so we can keep the wheels on at the company. Trust me, I have fallen subject to nerd kryptonite many times, and I'm sure you probably have too. So if that's you, head over to Electric. For Mac Power Users listeners, Electric is offering a free pair of Beats Solo 3 headphones for taking a qualified meeting. Just go to electric.ai/MPU. Once again, electric, electric.ai/MPU. Go there now and get your free pair of Beats Solo 3 headphones today for scheduling a meeting. And our thanks to Electric for their support of the Mac Power Users.
Charlie, in addition to being a parent and a developer and an indie developer on the side, you are also a podcast host. You host the Excellent Launched podcast, and I think you've really found something really interesting. So this is a show where you sit down and interview mostly developers, but there's some other people on here as well, people like me, who kind of make things in our corner of the internet and talk to them about their background and their projects and what they do. This is a pretty big break from software development. So how did this come about?
Yeah, so like I mentioned it earlier. I do like video editing and motion graphics. That was always sort of my side hustle pre-iOS development, really. And one of the areas I really struggled with these projects, I would do like freelance, commercials for people or little bumpers for churches or something like that. And one of the areas I really struggled with was audio. That was just, I never had learned it. I'd never spent that much time with it, and I was never good at it. And so as a way to solve that problem, I did what any, boring dude in the Midwest will do. Got a friend and was like, hey, we should start a podcast. And so this is a while back. And I basically started a podcast with a friend, your typical, two people talking show. Not terribly interesting, but it was really fun to do. And it taught me how to do all of this stuff that I hadn't been able to figure out. Around this time, I had also ironically bought a bunch of books on sound recording and sound design. I have somewhere in here, I have like the audio sound Bible, teaching you how to record like sound for Foley sound for people walking, that kind of thing, which ironically ended up being useful for dark noise way down the line. But anyway, so that's how I got into the actual podcast thing. And it turns out it's really fun. I really like it. I like having an avenue for sort of putting my thoughts out there, or at least talking through my thoughts. I think it does for me what writing does for a lot of people. Writing kind of locks me up. I found having a blog is really helpful, but it's a much more difficult thing for me to get, words to page compared to me just talking through like I'm doing now way too much and just continuing to expound. And like it pulls thoughts out of my head that I hadn't fully formed yet. And I really liked that. And so I was actually running that podcast still while I was working on Dark Noise. And after Dark Noise came out, that sort of fizzled out because Dark Noise was taking a lot of my time. But I was doing podcasts when Dark Noise came out. I was kind of like on Twitter, hey, anybody who runs a podcast, you should have me on, or I'm willing to come on and talk. And I was doing a couple of these shows. And through some of those conversations, somebody on Twitter brought up that should just be a show on its own. And that person just what is it called? Nerd sniped me, got that in my head. And I was never able to quite get it out of my head as a thing. And I started thinking man, that should be a show, like a talk show, kind of like what Gruber does, but focused on apps as they come out and talking to people about that specific process. Almost like the Tonight Show or something like that, where it's people coming on talking about a movie that they just filmed or whatever. And so at some point I decided, you know what, I should do this. I also was trying to get into the iOS developer community at the time. I was just trying to invest as much into there, get my name out there, kind of for marketing purposes, I just wanted to meet people in the space because I kind of fell in love with it as a community. And so that's really what Boar launched is kind of wanting this thing to exist and then realizing I have the skill set to sort of make it happen. And it might be a good avenue for me getting to meet all these people, which ended up, this was January of 2020 was when I launched it. And within a couple months, it turned out it was extremely important if I wanted to have conversations with people to have something like this, because it wasn't going to happen at conferences or anything like that.
Yeah, I remember not the last in-person WC, but the last big one in 19 and previous ones, people like John Voorhees and some of our other friends, running around trying to record stuff during the conference. That just doesn't seem fun to me. And the way you do it, you can sit down, you can do all your prep, you can have a nice conversation with somebody. What are some big things you've learned from interviewing all these developers? Have there been things that you've taken and applied to your own work?
There's definitely been a lot. In fact, a recent episode that just came out with Daniel Gauthier, who did Up Ahead, we talked about subscriptions and all of that. And our conversation about that really did reframe my thinking around how to look at this from I don't want to say ethical point of view, but from I feel good about this point of view. Because I really have struggled a lot with that switch and how I feel about it personally and how other people feel about it. And so hearing people talk through how they're thinking about business models has really changed my thinking a lot. It's also extremely solidified in my mind the importance of in-person, face-to-face, small group relationship building. I can't tell you how many of these episodes, the opening of how did you start this thing, especially ones where it's partnerships, were, well, I was at WWDC and I met this person and then we just kept talking and then, or we had this idea and we were at lunch or getting coffee somewhere and then it kind of spiraled into something. And that really got in my head as I need to keep pushing on this. It's easy, I think, as a indie, especially, engineering developer types are often, they like their, personal space. And I think it impressed on me that it's important to try to make space for these types of relationship building conversations. Twitter's amazing. Well, that was a sentence with lots of baggage, I guess, but the online community is great, right? In whatever form that takes now or in the future. But those smaller groups where you can be a little bit more honest and vulnerable and talk about how you think about things, those have just an enormous amount of value. And finding ways to make those happen, I think, has a lot of value. And I think the podcast has given me that in lots of ways.
Apple's taking a lot of heat because they're not as eager to have their employees stay home, and I really think, without me sounding like I'm in the bag for Apple, but I really think that for creativity, being in the same room with other people is very useful, and for coming up with creative solutions. And I believe that, the world has changed and people should be allowed to remote work. I mean, I mean, I love working from home so much. I couldn't, if you told me I had to go to an office every day, I'd just probably quit. So, you know, but I do think if you're working with a group of people trying to come up with creative solutions to difficult problems, getting them all in a room, not necessarily every day, but on occasion, is going to be something that you really can't replace.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm in a remote job now, which this is the first time I went full remote was after the pandemic sort of forced me to do it. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like I really miss the in-person element. I think there's a lot of inefficiencies that come with it, right? Like I think there's definitely truth to remote can be more efficient in lots of ways, but I think there's also the sort of, I don't know what the right word is, but like the happy accident inefficiencies that can come from in-person interactions are hard to replicate remotely. Not impossible, and people keep coming up with new digital and whatever solutions to try and help with that. But it's hard to beat sitting in a room goofing off with somebody and an idea sparking, and then you starting to riff on each other.
Yeah. And I think, the goal is for, virtual space to do that. What they call meta, they're going to be looking at each other with no pants and trying to figure out how to solve a problem. And maybe it requires a new generation of humans, to grow up with that, to be more comfortable in it. But there is something to be said for getting people in the same room. And I don't think that means everybody should have to go to the office every day. But I do think that there should be some kind of space for that, some kind of accommodation for it. But difficult problems. So getting back to the podcast, you got it out right in time for COVID. It's been publishing regularly. What have you learned from it, and what do you think about the whole process?
Yeah, it's well, actually, today you probably haven't seen this, but today I released episode 50, which I can't believe I made it this far.
Yeah,
it's been kind of a crazy. It's been crazy who's come on. I got this guy who I've looked up to for a really long time. His name is Stephen Hackett. I don't know if you've heard of him before.
Come on.
Yeah, he's the guy that loves all those screens on his computer. I heard about him.
Yeah, he's the multi-screen lifestyle guy. No, but like getting to talk to people you've looked up to for so long. I mean, you guys have done it probably lots of times on here. It's both intimidating, but also I don't know what the right word is. It's a confidence boost because you kind of see the person behind the thing. Like a lot of people you hold up as larger than life isn't the right word, but like caricatures, right? Like you couldn't do what they do because they're Brian Mueller. They made Carrot. Like I can't do that. That's not me. And then you talk to him and you're like, oh, he's a human who's a genius, to be fair, but like thinks like me and has a way that he goes about solving these problems. And like I could adopt some of those ideas into what I do. And that's been one of my favorite things about doing the show. And honestly, one of my favorite parts about doing the show is after we stop recording and sometimes we talk for another, hour. But I hope that that's also what the show's bringing to people listening is like, that's why I try to focus the first part of the show on the person's career that got them to the app. It's because like oftentimes that's the most interesting part because that's where you bring people along and realize this person's just like I am. And then they made a decision that led them to this place. And like, I could make changes in my life, or in my app or whatever, and I could maybe make something. It doesn't mean you're going to make an app. It could be you want to be a podcaster or a motion graphics designer or, woodworker or whatever. But like, there are ways to shift what you make in this world that aren't, I quit my job one day and went to a VC and got a $30 million valuation and built this, empire or something like that. There's this other world that exists that's a lot more accessible that any of us could really do. And I find that incredibly inspiring. And I hope that the podcast kind of helps articulate that inspiration to other people.
Charlie, I always like to end up these interviews just talking about a few of your favorite apps and services that maybe people have never heard of, and drop some knowledge on us, Charlie. What are the little apps that bring you delight?
Well, I guess if you're gonna use the word delight, I have to start with Up Ahead. I already mentioned it once, but this is by Daniel Gauthier. It's a new app, just came out this year, and it's essentially a countdown app. But I don't know if you guys have ever seen it before, but it is quite possibly the most delightful app I've ever used. Just full stop. It is obnoxiously polished in terms of it being really nice, but like every single little thing in the app is delightful. Every button that you tap has a nice little fun animation to it, not aggressive animation. Often you won't notice it until you've used it for a while. The settings are beautiful, and then it's really built around this idea of it's not just putting countdown widgets for your wedding on your lock screen. It's for opening the app itself, and you see this sort of timeline view of all of the events that you have in there. And I almost use it as like almost like an alternate calendar that's only the things that I'm looking forward to. So it's got like movies. I think I may have put MPU in there recording this episode because I was looking forward to it. Christmas break, these types of things all go in there. And it has really good widgets with like filters. So you can have, like, I have a widget that's movies, video games, and TV shows that I'm looking forward to. And like, it just always says what the next one is coming up. And then also like travel and stuff like that. And so that one has just been, I don't know, I've really enjoyed it as a utility, but also as a developer who appreciates nice things. It is the nicest of things. And in a similar vein, this one you probably definitely have heard of is Flighty.
Yes.
This was an app.
So good.
Yeah. It's ridiculously good. Like, it's one of those apps where and I've had Ryan Jones, the creator, on the show. He's not a developer, he's not a designer. He is I guess product manager. I don't know, I don't remember what he calls himself, but it's almost like he's like the Steve Jobs, for lack of better example, where it's like he won't let any little thing go, it feels like. And so he pushes all the people that are doing all of the different pieces to make something that's like super polished and just good. It's the best word for it. And so as a developer, I've had the app for a long time because it's just really inspiring. It's one of those apps where you're tempted to copy it way more than you probably should. And I'll often do things that are not as good in my app, so I'm not just completely copying what he did in Flighty, because it's just brilliant. But then as I started traveling again, I can't believe how good the app is. I haven't gotten to use it with live activities or the dynamic island yet, but that looks amazing too. Just a amazing app all around, which I know I'm preaching to the choir here probably, but can't recommend that one enough.
Now, up next on our list, I see two calendar apps, but one is not a calendar app anymore. So what's going on here?
One is not a calendar app anymore.
Well, didn't Cron get purchased? Are they gone?
Oh, I don't know. I hope not. Well, here, I'll just explain myself. So,
okay.
First off, Fantastical, best calendar app. I mean, I don't think I need to say any more. I feel like anytime I look up a tutorial, I hear David Sparks talking about what's great about Fantastical. Anyway, because that app is just absolutely wonderful. But Cron, I'm curious to hear you say that, because I haven't really kept up with it very well.
I will offer a real-time correction in that they did get purchased, but they say that so Cron got purchased by Notion, and Notion says they're going to remain like an independent app. So,
okay,
hopefully that work pans out.
Yeah. So Cron was like, I don't even know if it technically exited beta. I don't know the story with Cron.
I don't think it did.
Okay, but essentially, it's another calendar app. I think it's Electron, and I know there was a lot of hoopla about that being good or bad or whatever. I don't like it as much as Fantastical personally, but is one feature that is just killer, and I've been I've poked the Fantastical people a couple times because I want this in Fantastical, so I don't need Cron anymore. But that is for scheduling meetings. Fantastical has the what do they call it? Openings where you can like share your calendar with somebody else and they can pick a time, right? Is that what it's called?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. But Cron has a similar thing. So the idea is, I'm recording an episode with somebody who lives in a different time zone as me. I need to share with them all of my availability so they can pick a time. But I don't know about you guys, but other than work, like in my normal job, I can say I'm at this job from, 8 to 4 or 7:30 to 4 every day. And anything that's open on that calendar is open to anybody at my job, right? Because that's what I'm there for. But for podcast recording, my world doesn't exist in that level of purity. And so what Cron lets you do is, instead of saying, here's my calendar, you can pick any time, I can take my cursor and I can basically paint on my calendar available times. So I can just go through my calendar in week view and I can just drag a box over all of the time sections that I'm saying are available. So if I'm about to record an episode with somebody and I'm trying to schedule a time with them, I'll just go 2, 3, or 4 weeks out and I'll just highlight, okay, I'm available here. Oh, but I have to drop the kids off and it's going to take me extra 15 minutes after that, actually. So I need to make sure that there's some gap here or whatever. I can make those individual decisions. And then it just generates a link that I can share with them. Again, just like Calendly or Fantastical does with openings. But it's that specific ability to paint. I'm saying paint. I don't think that's the word they use. But I can drag a box over those times to create those openings for them. That is the killer feature. And I still use that for creating these links today, which is why I was scared when you said, aren't they going away?
Yeah, there's something similar with Fantastical called proposals, which is the opposite of openings, where you can say, okay, I'm going to give you 5 different options for recording the show, and you pick one. And that's not the same, though. It's not where you just say, here are all the open times, pick something in there. In the case of Fantastical, you create them. It's quite easy to create them, though. Once you create one, you just say propose another time, and you can drag them around on your calendar. And I actually use that more than openings because I'm not a fan of just letting people book time with me whenever they want.
Right.
It's under very tightly controlled circumstances. So when someone wants to meet with me, I will often do the openings in Fantastical. But you should check that out and see. That might be enough for you. But
no, I remember that now because I think I was complaining about this, and they reached out to me at one point and gave me a preview of it too. And the thing with proposals is you pick those specific times.
Exactly.
So if I'm open from on Fridays, I can do any time of the day, right? And so to say I'm available from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock or something like that, I have to create a proposal for 9 o'clock and then create a proposal for 9:30 and create a proposal. And this is for an hour and a half, recording or something like that, versus saying I'm available between these times for any hour and a half chunk in between there. But that I was doing that for a little bit. I forgot about that before I discovered Crons. And if Cron went away, that's probably what I would go back to. But I think it's just a small tweak to how proposals work is what would get it there.
Yeah, and then another option would be Calendly. They do that too, where people can book time with you. But it's an interesting problem, and I think people are getting smarter about using calendars in ways more than just when you go to the dentist, and that means that we want bigger features, and that's cool.
Yeah, especially as remote and this cross time zone, cross the world scheduling stuff. That's where it gets really complicated.
Yeah.
And these tools are amazing.
What else is on your list of?
So I have on here Twitter. I know it's in a weird spot right now, and I will do my best not to derail this whole thing into another one of these conversations. But I mean, the iOS community as an entity is amazing, honestly. It's the only reason I'm here talking to you guys. It's the only reason Dark Noise has really taken off, I think, is sort of not just taken off. The reason it was built the way it was built is because me, a random developer with no following or anything, started tweeting about what I was building. And a lot of people joined the test flight and were giving me suggestions as the sort of power users. And so the app built around what people were asking for. And a lot of that comes from the community, which currently, or at least then, lived in Twitter. And so I put in here Twitter Mastodon, because that I have found so far, Mastodon, there's enough people in our world there right now that, like, as I've been toying with subscription stuff, I can post things there and I get that sort of level of feedback that was really helpful for me. And that's the type of stuff that I'm looking for in these platforms is a place to talk to the community about the things that you're working on and get feedback from people and give feedback to people. And so, yeah, it's a weird recommendation and it's an obvious one too, but while all the drama is going on, I don't want to lose sight of, like, the value of these platforms is not the platforms, it's the people. And I hope that the people continue to exist in different places. I know there's also, like, the Relay Discord, and Mac Power Users has a forum. And for whatever reason, for me, the whole post reply system is what's worked well for me and I can keep up with. But I hope we can, like, stay as an entity. And I think that's, as a service, sort of, for me, that has been incredibly valuable, sort of weirdly.
That makes sense. I mean, I'm honestly leaning into just, like, I've got a Discord for the labs and I go to the Relay Discord, and I'm really just kind of going into those spaces as my kind of primary social media. I mean, we talked about this on the latest episode of Focus, but when Disney replaced Bob Chapek with Bob Iger, I spent, usually my relationship with Twitter is I go in and look at my ats and, just the people I follow, which are very few. But I went into, like, the main feed of Twitter just to see what people were saying about this big executive shakeup. And wow, I forgot that Twitter is kind of terrible. When you just read
you
what
break
everybody
out
writes.
your followers.
Yeah. And I'm like, whoa, this is bad. And the other thing that was shocking to me was that, like, I spent like 3 hours reading stuff from people that I don't even know or care about. So that was a good reminder that, these Discords are a pretty good place to go. The people there are quality people, and you don't have to deal with that craziness. But that's just me.
Yeah, I think the important thing is the idea of I guess, like I mentioned earlier, the relationship building, like having a community that you can throw your ideas at, bounce ideas off of, contribute to their ideas, and, like, everybody grow together. Like I'm sorry to divert again, but I interviewed Michael Flareup recently, who you might know him. He's done a lot of, like, app icons, very famous app icons, been around in this community forever. And he talked about this forum. I can't remember the name of it. But I've heard other people talk about it. And it was just this forum of people who made app icons for the Mac back in the day. And, like, they all sort of grew together over this seemingly silly thing of just app icons. And because they were all bouncing ideas off of each other and coming up with new things together, they got really good at what they do. And a lot of them went to Apple and all these big companies and have had a genuine, like, real influence on the world. I don't know. We focus a lot on the negatives of social media as a, air quotes, big bubble thing. But, like, these little communities can be incredibly powerful tools for, like, amplifying human expression. Man, as I'm saying it, I'm rolling my eyes at myself. But I don't know. I just think finding a group of people to share your ideas with is super powerful. I guess that's the only point I'm trying to get across here.
Yeah. I'll quickly plug Michael's great book, the iOS App Icon Book. It was a Kickstarter,
yes.
And then I think you can pre-order it now. It is one of the most incredible books I own. And I've got a whole bookcase full of tech books from over the years. And the work that he and his team did on this is it's something really special.
It's so good. It's amazing.
Another app on your list is Trello, which I think that comes up more and more frequently. So how are you using Trello? I mean, you're a single man operation. Trello is a Kanban board kind of app. A lot of times it's used on teams. What are you doing with Trello?
essentially Kanban, because I've worked on teams my whole career. Kanban as a mechanism for project management is how my brain works, or at least how it has worked. And so Trello is really just like, it feels like it's the lightest weight version of those that I had been able to find. Whenever I started, I guess it probably started with Dark Noise. I don't know if I had used it for any other projects before that. But basically, I just need a place to dump all ideas that come in, especially when that test flight started getting a lot of people. I got a lot of suggestions and I couldn't integrate everything. And so essentially what I needed was a backlog, as you'd call it in the traditional sort of Kanban project management sense. And then it's like a place I can put something and then let my mind stop focusing on it. And then when I'm looking for new work to do, I can go through that backlog and pull ideas into my sort of project that I'm actively working on at the time. I wouldn't say I love Trello. I wish it had like a native Mac app that felt nicer, if that makes sense. But in terms of utility, I have never been able to get off of it. I've tried multiple times. I found apps I even would argue I like better. But as I'm sure you guys can relate with, sometimes you become one with the app that you use, and it's really hard to ever break out of it. And so that's sort of where I'm at with Trello.
I feel like there's space for like a native Kanban app, kind of like, the way MindNode makes mind map simple, something like that that's a native app on Apple platforms. I just feel like there's something there for that. And I've looked for years and there never really is. Everything's too complicated, or a web service or something. But that there's some space out there, I think, for somebody to make a great app.
There's actually a really good app that fits exactly what you're talking about called Tasks, that honestly is the one that I keep trying to switch to, because that whenever I said there's ones I could argue are better, that's actually what I was thinking of. It feels like it feels like the Reminders app, but with Kanban. It gets a lot of those little details right. It's definitely like a native feeling app. It has an iOS app, a Mac app. That's definitely the one that I have Dark Noise in, but I haven't ever been able to get like transitioned off of Trello for, if that makes any sense. But yeah, if you haven't tried it, I would really recommend trying out Tasks, because that one, I know lots of people who like love it, and the developer's great, like, and keeps growing it and making it better and better.
Yeah, I'll check it out. I mean, I'm so deep in with OmniFocus. With their new JavaScript automation, I was thinking I could probably cook something together that could like use a tag-based system to do it for me, because I just kind of want a status board view. I don't want to put all the little bits in there. I just want to see what projects are in what status. And you could also do that with a whiteboard, honestly. But I do think that is an area, like people keep talking about Trello, but I never hear from anybody that really loves Trello,
Yeah, it gets the job done. It has all the features that you want, and it's been there for a long time. And so it's kind of reliable in that regard.
Yeah. And for like teams, the online features are great, but I do think there's a group of people like you and I who largely work independently, but we still want that view, we just want it.
Exactly.
Another one on your list that I wanted to call out was from our friend Federico Vitici. It's the Apple Frame shortcut. Tell us about that and how you use it.
I mean, that's definitely my most used shortcut. So, I mean, for anybody who doesn't know, which is probably nobody on this who's listening to this, but it's just a shortcut that you can take a screenshot on your phone or basically any Apple device at this point and run the shortcut against that image, and it will put that image into the frame of that device. So if I take a screenshot on my iPhone 14 Pro, I can just run the shortcut against that image, and it will add the iPhone 14 Pro like phone device frames with a transparent background, and then put my screenshot into that. And on the 14 Pro, it includes the hole for the dynamic island, the island, I guess is what we call it. And I use that, I mean, constantly. I can't tell you, I use it for, like, if you look at my App Store screenshots or a lot of my promotional material, I could use, I use Figma and Photoshop and all these different designs. I could use like a template to put it in, but it's just so much easier to just run it through frames and then take that PNG and then bring it into whatever app I'm doing my design work in. I also use it a lot at work, like my normal job, for sending screenshots to designers, because like the contextual, the context of a screenshot in the frames is sometimes really important. Like if it's, you want it to be with those rounded corners, or like especially up towards the top, whether it's the notch or the island, or an older device that doesn't have any, seeing it like butted up against those elements does change how a design looks and feels. And so simply as a tool for showing people like designs that we're working on in the context of a device, I've found it to be just invaluable.
Yeah, and there's a couple points on this one. The first is this year he moved the frame elements into an iCloud Drive folder.
Yeah.
So now historically, he was embedding the frames into the shortcut, which I knew that was like just, a battle like Sisyphus. You were never going to succeed in that eventually because there's so many different frames and shortcuts. When you put that much code, the way shortcuts would do that, it would convert a binary file into a text file, and that stuff is it's just so easy to break that. So
it's crazy he got it working.
Yeah, agreed. Especially as long as he did. But this year he put it in cloud. But so if you download it and it says, we need to access an iCloud file to get these files, you can trust Federico. It's good. Just, you're good. And the other thing is, I would argue this is something that needs to be Sherlocked. Apple has to, when you take a screenshot on your device, there should be a checkbox or something that says put a frame around it. And honestly, Apple should have this built into the operating system, in my opinion.
That would be really handy.
From your lips to Tim's ears, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What is Hand Mirror? That's another one on your list.
I added this right before we started recording. It's an app I've known about for a while, but never needed to use. So essentially, it's a incredibly simple menu bar app that, like, I can go up right now, and if I tap it, it just pops down a window that shows my webcam. It's literally like right before you get on a call, you want to check, that your hair doesn't look weird or that there's nothing funky in the background. I do this all the time with Zoom. I'll start a meeting in Zoom just for the sake of seeing what's visible on my webcam to make sure there's nothing. I don't know that there's ever actually been anything, but you fix your hair or whatever it is. And this just puts it right into your menu bar and makes it way easier. And the reason I did it was because I don't have a Zoom account on my personal device. So when I started this call, I realized I couldn't just start a meeting from Zoom to check. And so I was like, I know an app that does this. And I quickly downloaded it. And it was like, I'm putting this on every device now because this is incredibly handy. So I just want to throw a plug out there for that because it's pretty cool.
This is great. I didn't know about it either, but I do the same thing. But I would always use QuickTime. I'd open QuickTime.
Yeah, I've done that too. The problem with QuickTime is it's flipped.
Yeah.
So if you try to fix your hair, you always mess it up because your hand's all confused. And this one, it's more like a mirror. It makes it, I don't know what the right word is, but it's your right hand you will see on the right side of your screen, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, I just installed it. So thank you. I'm in. Well, Charlie, thank you so much for coming on today. We have all enjoyed watching your journey with, Dark Noise and its development, and recommend everybody head over to launchedfm.com, check out Charlie's podcast, and I can't wait to see what you do next. If you are able to pull this thing off where you get a subscription, you're able to, make it your own thing. I expect we're going to get so many great features and ideas from you. So I will be first in line. Just let me know. And thanks so much for coming on today. Where else should people go to find you? What's your Twitter handle?
It's _Chucky C. You can also just go to my website. It's charliemchapman.com. And then there you can find, Mastodon or wherever we end up all landing when the dust finally settles.
All right. Well, I want to thank our sponsors today. That's 1Password, Squarespace, and Electric. We are the Mac Power Users. You can find us at relay.fm/MPU. You can check out the MPU forums at talk.macpowerusers.com, and we'll see you next time.